So, hello everyone. My name is Pamela Altoff. I am the Executive Director of Cannabis Business Association of Illinois. And today we're hosting a webinar on banking. We've had many questions and a lot of curiosity and interest in how the banking industry blends into the cannabis industry, particularly as we all know that although it's legal here in Illinois, federally, cannabis is still a substance one controlled substance. So banking is one of those areas that some banks choose to do it, others do not. So with us today, we have Katie Hahn, who is the Vice President of Business Solutions of INB. And INB is a privately held bank in central Illinois, specifically Springfield, and does have 13 branches, some of them also in Missouri. So Katie, without further ado and without me complicating things even more, I'm going to turn it over to you. You have a presentation and I might ask some questions as we go through the presentation, but basically this is the Katie Hahn INB Bank presentation and show.
Thank you, Pam. So yeah, welcome everybody. I'm just going to share presentation.
And I should also point out that INB is extremely progressive and that they are a member of the Cannabis Business Association, and they are our only financial institution that is a member. So they are very progressive and we do appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you, Pam, for that introduction. I am going to just kind of walk through a few, good to know pointers as far as banking in the cannabis industry. As you all know, it is highly regulated. Compliance is a very, very key component of deposit accounts as we bank cannabis related or even the licensed entities accounts. So I do want to talk a little bit first about some major obstacles as far as banking cannabis related business. Obviously, the most obvious obstacle is that it is still a Schedule I narcotic, so it's a controlled substance. And with that, there's two different types of federal regulatory agencies that examine whichever type of bank you are. There's the nationally chartered banks, such as INB. We are a nationally chartered bank. And then there are other state chartered banks. So if you are a nationally chartered bank, you are examined by the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, the OCC, which we I do have to add, just passed with flying colors again last month. They were in here examining all of us and our processes as it relates to cannabis banking. And then if you're a state chartered bank, you are examined by the Federal Deposit Insurance Company, or better known as the FDIC. Another obstacle, obviously, is the United States Treasury with FinCEN and the Bank Secrecy Act. With the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, they require quarterly reports that are related to financial transactions. And that's just a regulatory compliance, but it tends to be an obstacle. And then the Bank Secrecy Act and Anti-Money Laundering Act requires banks to monitor transactions and then report any criminal or suspicious activity, such as transactions typically indicative of illegal transactions. So I did touch on the regulatory compliance. Oh, go ahead.
I'm going to ask a real quick question. Yep. I know that because of that regulatory oversight on banks, that there's also kind of decisions made about how much money, we had talked earlier and I said clients, but basically how much money banks can actually have in their portfolios relating to one specific industry. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit in cannabis and why some people have been turned away from banks that got into the cannabis industry earlier and they're now saying, no, we can't have any additional cannabis clients?
Sure, absolutely. Great question. So right now, INB is one of 5 banks in the state of Illinois that will bank cannabis accounts. That being said, each bank has kind of discretionary input as to how much money is on deposit, lending opportunities that are done via cannabis related accounts. And those, like I said, are set per bank. So we have our own here at INB. I can tell you, we do take on new customers, but it is with discretion. We definitely will, look at each one individually, look at the financials, really get to know that customer and the processes surrounding their business. Right now we have 35 cannabis customers. Now those aren't accounts, those are just the actual customers. But some of them are licensed accounts, some of them are management accounts, holding companies, investment accounts, kind of the whole 9 yards. But to answer your question, it is bank specific.
Thank you.
Yep. So as far as the regulatory compliance goes, I want to touch on some key components with that. So tier 1 versus tier 2, what does that mean? Well, tier 1 are all of our plant touching entities, our licensed operators. And then the tier 2 or tier 3 are those non-plant touching, such as, like I just said, your holding companies, your investment agencies, equipment, service suppliers, and providers for those businesses that are a licensed entity. We do, and all banks require quarterly reporting. Here at INB, we do have a third-party software program. It's a core technology that is used for the uploading and storing, kind of a repository, if you will, of documentation that will hold the applications, that will hold the licenses. It also has an API from the platform to the seed to sale component, or a point of sale system for our customers. It's really just go ahead.
No, I was going to say, is that normal?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So it's just an easier, kind of seamless way of having those documents and all of the regulatory information that a bank would need. There is, as you would expect, enhanced due diligence procedures that are surrounding banking a cannabis client. So we will review financial performance, licenses and applications, all security procedures, including physical and any cash handling procedures that are in place for locations, also capital sources, key man, and corporate structure as well. So then the last thing, as far as regulatory compliance goes, is it's just overall an expense. Because of the software that I was just talking about, the full-time employee and support staff, reviewing the data, preparing reports, and opening account procedures, plus just the additional customer service representatives that are on hand with the dedicated expertise surrounding all of the compliance that you have to keep up to date with. I mean, it's constantly changing, as you understand, Pam, and the world that you're in. Just when we think it's, flying through smoothly, then something else comes through. So just keeping up to date on all that can add additional expenses.
And can I ask, Katie, you had mentioned earlier too that you had 35 clients related cannabis entities. How long has INB Bank been involved in cannabis? How many years?
Since 2019.
Okay, so when it became legal.
Yes, yes. So the INB board made a decision after long scrutiny and thought and lots of meetings and meeting with the OCC to basically, it's becoming more normal, and they figured they would be one step ahead in banking these customers instead of having so much cash on the streets. It's actually safer this way to be allowed banking than, carrying suitcases of cash all around the place. So, which brings me to actual, I guess if you want to say banking is fun, I can make it fun when we talk about deposit accounts. So some of the services I want to talk about are what we do offer, and then some of the limited services that are available also. So if you are a plant touching customer, you do have a license, you can expect higher fees. Also the standard analysis fees. Standard analysis fees are what you will see basically at your bank statement. So you're going to have a monthly maintenance fee. but then also any functionality that you would have with your account, such as ACHs or wires or mobile deposit. That's going to be your standard analysis fees. And then there are limited services with the plant touching versus a non-plant touching. If you're plant touching, we can issue you checks. You can deposit those checks. You can deposit them via mobile deposit, where you take a picture of the front and the back of the check. Those are going to be typically more for if you don't have a large bulk amount. If you do have a bulk amount of checks that you need to deposit, we can give you a scanner that would sit on the desktop, and that's going to be a remote deposit capture. You can do bill pay through our digital banking platform. And like I said, when I keep saying most banks offer these same functionality as well. ACH, you can do ACH debit origination or credit, and then domestic wires. So the unavailable services for a licensed entity are debit and credit cards, and that is due to Visa and MasterCard restrictions. And then international wires. We do not allow international wires on a licensed entity. There are workarounds, as there are with most things. If you do need to have Visa and debit cards, just because, right, it's 2022 and we use debit cards for everything. It just cannot be associated with that licensed account. It could be a holding account. It could be a management account. Anything, any type of account that does not have that license associated with it, we can still do debit cards for. It would be like a regular commercial checking account.
And I'm going to assume that someone comes to you, a cannabis operator comes to you and sits down, all of this information would be provided to them at that particular time as well. One of the complaints that we receive from even current operators today is the fact that this is such a heavily cash infused industry.
Absolutely.
But they still need that, again, more professional 2022 availability of purchasing equipment from other states, getting that, and you need a credit card. They're not going to wait for you to send a check. You need that. So I'm assuming, again, as you just stated, those workarounds would be part of any kind of conversation you would have with a new client.
Absolutely. Yep. We talk about, basically those needs up front and kind of get to know the business, how you're operating, how you pay bills, how people pay you, and then really just come up with that solution. We really get to know the habits of our customers. So it just becomes really a fun partnership. So you just brought up a good point. You were talking about cash. So as far as deposit collection, I mean, there's just so much cash out there right now. And so with that being said, there's lots of different third parties out there that are cash logistics couriers. We have one that we partner with. I actually was able to go visit their headquarters in Denver, Colorado not too long ago. And I was just in awe. I mean, it's just a top-notch facility, and their process is so diligent in how they do this. So it's an unmarked armored car that would come to the location, say it's a dispensary. They come to the location, they pick up the cash deposit for that day. They're in clear bags that are marked exactly what's in there. They do a count there on camera in the location. It is then taken to the location of that vendor for a secondary count, which is then inputted into that platform, the portal that I was talking about earlier, the online platform. Then it is taken to the closest Federal Reserve, and it will be deposited in that checking account within 24 hours. Wow. So there are several different vendors out there in the United States, but the one that we use is just, they're impeccable and they're amazing to work with. So as far as fees that are associated with that, it's a contract between the logistics firm and the customer. So we definitely can do, as far as recommendation, but because I said there's many of them out there to choose from, it's definitely between the customer and that logistics firm.
Katie, is that true for ATM machines too? I mean,
Yes.
I know most dispensaries have one or two on site. How does that work?
Yeah, so that is not directly affiliated with INB, so that's on the customer as well.
Okay.
Another question we get asked a lot is about lending. So the kind of the rules around commercial loans right now, especially with INB specifically, real estate loans are preferred. So anything secured by real estate, but also including construction. Lines of credit are difficult in the space due to the inability basically to evaluate or secure inventory or equipment. And it again, typically secured by real estate. There
And
are
is
some
that,
very,
Katie, I apologize, I'm
that's
interrupting
okay.
you. Is that real estate that is owned free and clear? Does the bank take a secondary position if people still owe or have a mortgage on real estate?
You know, full transparency, Pam, I do not wear a lending hat. So I'm going to have to defer that to my lending officer, who, by the way, will be able to be available for question and answer at a later date. But I would hate to step into his realm of things and mess up any opportunities there.
I would just ask him to be prepared to answer that question because I'm going to ask it again on the 26th. So thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So some of the strict underwriting standards that go along with commercial lending, a lower loan to value threshold. I have there 65%, as is or best use appraisal standards, as opposed to in a normal situation as completed. There's a stricter debt coverage ratio, 1.5 to 1, higher interest rates, 100 to 200 basis points higher than the I guess normal, if you will. The origination fees are 1 to 2% of principal, shorter amortizations, which would equal 15 years, shorter loan terms, 3 to 5 years, and then personal guarantees and payment reserve accounts were applicable. So a little bit different in the lending world as it relates to cannabis than it would just a regular commercial loan. And that goes to pretty much similar with personal loans. So there's some challenges around those as well. And we will be able to answer any questions with those once I have my commercial lender with me as well. But secondary market challenges such as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they will not include cannabis related income, which can then present a challenge for the debt to income obtaining long-term fixed rate loans. Then internal challenges with that, there are strict underwriting standards, including the loan to value restrictions, shorter amortizations. It makes pricing more difficult for banks to carry long-term on their books due to interest rate risk versus regulatory oversight of the management of that risk.
And these standards are really not determined by individual bank boards. Is this more of a regulatory standard across the board that most banks would have in place?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so
Pretty common.
and then the other question that occurs to me as we've been kind of going through this is that relationship that you're talking about. You know, I wore it on purpose today. I come from a family business, and I know that when you know, we started and got up and running, our relationship with the bank was a full relationship. Our money was there, our checking, you know, the loans, everything, that was the relationship. It wasn't as if I could walk in the door and get a loan without having all of those other similar services tied into that facility. I'm assuming that that's even more crucial where it's cannabis related.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, we get to know those customers so well and just, you know, take them on as family basically, because you start at the beginning and you just keep adding on. And so many of our customers are growing, right? I mean, they're getting more licenses and they're having,
Right.
you know, more locations all over the United States. And so it's just that much more crucial to really know the customers and have that relationship from the get-go.
And I would also note, again, I forgot to tell you when you were talking about this, but the association, when we went from, you know, this kind of alliance, which really wasn't what I would consider to be a professional organization, to actually putting into place bylaws, getting standing as a not-for-profit at the state of Illinois, and becoming a true trade association, finding a bank that would even house our accounts because cannabis was in the title. It was very, very difficult. And we are paying substantially higher fees than I think, a normal business account would pay. And we don't touch the plant, and we are like that. We're
Right.
one of those affiliates, and yet we pay higher costs for any kinds of services. And then just, again, the normal monthly service fee is extraordinarily high.
Right, yes. And I'm finding also the financial institutions in the state that maybe did bank cannabis or even cannabis related accounts are getting out of it. So they just become too heavy. Like you were asking me earlier about that threshold where that is. If they start getting too close to it, they'll just, back off. So whereas INB has done a fabulous job at monitoring that and really being smart with our kind of onboarding process, you got to be top notch and have your stuff in order for sure.
And following the regulations, you've got to be as up to speed as every operator that's regulated by the state is as well.
Absolutely.
I recognize. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So some common questions always relate back to debit cards. But like I touched on earlier, Visa and MasterCard are just adamant about restricting the use of debit and credit rails for licensed entities and operators, regardless of what the card is being used for. I've had customers say, but I'm just buying office supplies. I don't understand why I can't have a debit card. And it just is what it is. That's a Visa and MasterCard restriction that we abide by. But I did kind of mention that workaround earlier, just as long as it is not tied to that licensed account, we would be able to issue credit cards and debit cards. The talk right now is about cashless ATMs. I don't know if you've heard about that. Okay, sure. So some systems will accept debit cards in the form of cashless ATMs. And on that transaction, it just looks like an ATM withdrawal. However, Visa and MasterCard are kind of onto that, and they will aggressively pursue enforcement when and if needed. So it's definitely out there. I've had customers ask about it, talk about it. But again, that's outside of the INB realm.
Yeah, and I will tell you, here in Illinois, they are becoming much more aggressive than they have been in the past 6 months. And I think that's just, they're catching up with the states that have recreationalized cannabis, and it just took them that long to get there. So I would note that that's definitely happening.
Sure. Yep. Yes. And then we get questions on loans, like you were asking earlier. So while cash is king, but it is also the most liquid form of solvency. So easy to disappear in the event of delinquency. Marijuana is definitely still an agricultural commodity with a lifespan. So market compression, competition for market share. Like I said, I list the states here where it's not necessarily an issue in Illinois, but some of the others, such as Oregon, Colorado, and California, the dispensaries rival Walgreens and CVS on street corners. So it's just.
And that's one of the reasons I love you. That's one of the reasons why Illinois chose to be a state that limited the number of licenses that could be issued in a specific time frame and require an evaluation, precisely because of that competition and the fact that there can be overproduction or so thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So some of the things that we're kind of hearing about and looking for as far as the future in the cannabis world. Safe Banking Act, I mean, it's out there. Everyone's asking about it. Everyone's talking about it. If I had a crystal ball and I could look in it, don't we all wish that, right?
So you want to talk about that? I mean, we follow the federal government's decision with regard to cannabis and what they're proposing as closely as we do here in the state of Illinois. And quite honestly, under the Obama administration, it was very clear in the Treasury Department, and there was verbiage in every single budget that was passed, that the federal government would not be going after any state or state associated business in a state that had recreationalized cannabis. It was very clear. When President Trump took office, not so clear, in fact, very, very, very gray, and made it even harder for financial institutions to feel comfortable in working within the cannabis industry. Now we actually have the Safe Banking Act, and it's kind of ping-ponging back and forth. The House has passed it twice. The Senate has a different, much more comprehensive version for cannabis regulation and compliance. And so they compete against each other. And that's the frustration of many of us, that were saying, just make it simple and make it clear, as it was even under the Obama administration, that nobody was going to be called in question or be, there was no enforcement legally against any of these entities that chose to engage in the cannabis industry. Not so clear even today with the new Biden administration, as all of these pieces of legislation kind of compete with each other and yet are on the table and are moving forward in one chamber but not in the other. So it's very frustrating still to this day.
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, to echo that, yes, frustrating is a good word to use.
Sorry.
So, and then the Controlled Substances Act amendment or descheduling.
Right. Actually, I will interrupt again and tell you that,
yes,
and I love this because it's not a partisan. Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mays has filed legislation that literally takes cannabis off the Schedule 1 controlled substance list. And that is getting some traction again in the House, which seems to be a little bit more progressive than the Senate.
Sure.
But that is gaining traction, and that too would alleviate some of the banking concerns that people had. So we're following that real closely as well.
Yeah, I mean, we could basically have accounts that are just regular commercial accounts if that were to happen.
Precisely. So our fingers are crossed. And we're hoping, she's got bipartisan support for the legislation. So we're hoping she's reelected, and that she gets, if nothing else, a hearing on that and can start talking about that as a potential option.
Yeah, well, I'm excited about the future. That's great.
Aren't we all? And so in conclusion, on the 26th of this month in April, we are having a follow-up webinar with all of those professional individuals who have expertise specifically in loans and compliance. And CBAI will be advertising that opportunity. So hopefully the idea is that people can gain access to this webinar on our website, and then we can have an interactive question and answer period of time with, again, professionals from INB Bank who can answer all of those individual questions that people might have.
Yes, thank you, Pam. I will definitely have a commercial lender on there who is very knowledgeable in this area and works with many different lending customers as far as cannabis goes. I'll also have our compliance officer on here with me to answer questions specific as it relates to those documents, how and how often we require those, really just kind of a checklist of things that you could expect as far as onboarding with an account at INB. And then I'll also have our general counsel on. He was very, very instrumental in getting the cannabis program institutionalized here at INB. So he's kind of, it's his baby. He started it, and he's definitely very much still involved.
That will be extraordinarily helpful and useful to many of our members, and we will also offer that opportunity to anybody who's actually got a conditional dispensary or has already received their craft grow license. And that information will be on our website and will also be provided people via social media. And we, of course, will send that to all of our members and our friends and women in cannabis. So we look forward to the opportunity on the 26th. And if memory serves me correct, I believe it'll be at 1 o'clock, but don't count on that because I never can remember, but it definitely will be on the 26th in the afternoon. So I appreciate it. Katie's contact information is in front of us on the screen now. If you have any questions, and I'm assuming Katie will also in some particular point have the information about follow-up seminar on the 26th as well.
Yes, most definitely.
So thank you. We appreciate the time.